The year is 586 BCE. Jerusalem burns. The Temple of Solomon collapses in flames as Babylonian soldiers drive the defeated Israelites from their homeland. Forced into exile, the Jewish scribes find themselves immersed in the rich mythological traditions of Mesopotamia. Stories that will transform how they understand their own past. Fast forward to today, billions of people worldwide read the story of Cain and Abel as unique divine revelation. The tale of humanity's first murder, a brother killing brother out of jealousy over God's favor. But what if this foundational biblical narrative isn't original at all? What if the scribes who penned Genesis were drawing directly from much older pagan myths? Today, we expose the shocking ancient templates behind one of the Bible's most famous stories. The biblical account is deceptively simple. Spanning just 16 verses in Genesis chapter 4, Adam and Eve, expelled from Eden, have two sons. Cain becomes a farmer, tilling the soil. Abel tends flocks as a shepherd. Both brothers bring offerings to God, Cain from his harvest, Abel from his animals. Then comes the pivotal moment that launches humanity's first murder. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast. The text offers no explanation for this divine preference. No reason why Abel's lamb pleases God while Cain's grain does not. This divine rejection ignites a firestorm of jealousy in Cain. He lures his brother to a field and kills him, shattering the fragile peace of the post-Eden world with the first act of human-on-human violence. When God confronts him, Cain responds with history's first lie. Am I my brother's keeper? For this crime, God curses Cain to be a restless wanderer, yet places a mysterious mark upon him to prevent others from killing him. For centuries, readers have puzzled over the unanswered questions in this narrative. Why did God prefer Abel's offering? What was the mark of Cain? And perhaps most importantly, is this story truly unique to the Bible? The explosive answer is absolutely not. 2,000 years before Genesis was written, the ancient Sumerians, creators of the world's first written language, were already telling stories about conflicts between farmers and shepherds that bear astonishing similarities to Cain and Abel. The land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers was home to humanity's earliest civilizations and the birthplace of writing itself. Here, the ancient Sumerians crafted elaborate mythologies that reveal a cultural preoccupation with the tension between fundamental ways of life: the settled farmer and the wandering shepherd. In the Sumerian myth, Enlil Chooses the Farmer-God, we find a striking template for the later biblical story. The divine brothers, Emesh and Intin, representing the shepherd and the farmer, bring their dispute before Enlil, supreme god of the Sumerian pantheon. Each believes himself superior. Each presents offerings meant to demonstrate his greater value. After examining their gifts, Enlil renders his verdict. Intin, the farmer, is declared superior. The shepherd must submit to the farmer's primacy. Notice the ironic reversal. While God favors Abel, the shepherd in Genesis, here the farmer receives divine blessing. That would have been Cain. Yet the structural parallels are unmistakable. Two brothers with different occupations compete for divine favor through their offerings, resulting in one being elevated above the other. The Sumerians weren't finished exploring this theme. In another myth, Inanna Prefers the Farmer. The goddess of love and fertility must choose between two suitors: Enkidu, the farmer, and Dumuzi, the shepherd. Initially, Inanna favors the farmer, drawn to the stability and abundance of agricultural life. But through persistence and bold courtship, the shepherd Dumuzi eventually wins her hand. These myths weren't mere entertainment. They reflected profound social realities in ancient Mesopotamia, where tensions between agricultural and pastoral communities shaped political and economic life for millennia. The farmer represented stability, permanence, and controlled food production, the foundation of urban civilization itself. Tied to specific lands, farmers built the first cities and created the surpluses that made complex society possible. The shepherd, in contrast, embodied mobility, freedom, and adaptability. Dependent on finding pasture for flocks, shepherds lived more precarious but less constrained lives on the margins of settled society. These weren't just different jobs. They were competing worldviews, different ways of relating to land, community, and the divine. The Mesopotamian myths articulate this cultural divide that shaped the ancient Near East for thousands of years. But the parallels to Cain and Abel run even deeper. Mesopotamian literature repeatedly explores themes of sibling rivalry and divine preference. Assyrian royal inscriptions tell us of King Sennacherib, who favored his younger son Esarhaddon as successor, triggering jealousy and murderous plots from the elder princes. While not ending in fratricide like the biblical tale, this historical narrative showcases the explosive potential of parental favoritism, exactly the divine favoritism that ignites Cain's murderous rage. Consider this comparison. In the Cain and Abel story, a farmer and shepherd compete through offerings. God prefers the shepherd, leading to murder and exile. In Enlil Chooses the Farmer-God, a farmer god and shepherd god compete for divine recognition. Enlil favors the farmer, who is declared superior. In Inanna Prefers the Farmer, a farmer and shepherd compete for divine marriage, with preference shifting from farmer to shepherd. The template is unmistakable. Makes me think of Jesus as the shepherd. Divine brothers representing farming versus herding. Offerings presented to a deity. Divine preference causing conflict. A judgment rendered that elevates one brother over the other. When the Jewish scribes found themselves exiled in Babylon during the 6th century BCE, precisely when scholars believe the early chapters of Genesis were composed, they were immersed in these ancient stories. The Babylonian Empire had inherited these myths, which remained vital parts of Mesopotamian religious and literary tradition. The template was there, waiting to be adapted to the emerging monotheistic framework of Israelite religion. But the Mesopotamian myths aren't the only potential source for the Cain and Abel narrative. Egypt, the ancient superpower whose shadows loomed large over Israelite history, offers an even more dramatic parallel in its foundational myth of divine fratricide. For thousands of years before Genesis was written, Egyptians told and retold the story of Osiris and Set, divine brothers whose conflict would shape their cosmic understanding of order and chaos, life and death. In this central Egyptian myth, Osiris rules as the benevolent king of Egypt, bringing civilization, agriculture, and just laws to humanity. His brother Set, consumed by a toxic blend of jealousy and ruthless ambition, plots against him. In a shocking act of fratricide that would have resonated with ancient audiences, Set murders his brother Osiris. Not in a moment of heated rage like Cain, but through elaborate deception. According to the myth, Set constructs a magnificent chest perfectly fitted to Osiris's measurements. Then, at a banquet, offers it as a gift to whoever fits inside it perfectly. Osiris lies down in the chest. Set and his conspirators slam the lid shut, seal it with lead, and cast it into the Nile. A violation that makes Cain's field murder seem almost merciful by comparison. But unlike the Cain and Abel story, the Egyptian tale doesn't end with the murder. Isis, Osiris's wife, recovers the scattered pieces of her husband's body. Through magical ritual, she temporarily resurrects Osiris long enough to conceive a son, Horus, who grows up determined to avenge his father's murder. What follows is a cosmic struggle between Horus and Set, nephew against uncle, that Egyptian texts describe as a brutal, protracted conflict. After numerous confrontations, Horus ultimately triumphs. Set is defeated and banished to the desert regions, condemned to embody chaos and disorder, while Horus assumes his father's throne, restoring cosmic balance and justice to Egypt. The parallels to Cain and Abel are striking and multifaceted. Both narratives center on a brother killing brother out of jealousy and ambition. Both Set and Cain disrupt an established order through their violence. Both murders represent a primal rupture in cosmic harmony, the introduction of fratricidal violence into a previously peaceful world. The Egyptian religion, like the Hebrew tradition, placed enormous emphasis on the proper offerings and divine favor. While Osiris and Set don't explicitly compete through sacrifices like Cain and Abel, Egyptian religious practice was thoroughly infused with elaborate rituals of offerings designed to maintain divine favor, a cultural context that would have shaped how Egyptians understood conflicts over sacred offerings. The differences in divine judgment are revealing. Cain is cursed, but also marked for protection, becoming a wanderer, likely in the desert. Set is defeated and banished to the desert, also becoming an exile, but without the explicit protection granted to Cain. These contrasting fates reflect different cultural perspectives on punishment and redemption. The influence of Egyptian culture on Israelites cannot be overstated. Beyond the biblical accounts of Hebrew enslavement in Egypt, archaeological evidence confirms extensive cultural contact between the civilizations over centuries. The Exodus tradition itself, regardless of its historical details, demonstrates the profound Egyptian influence on Israelite cultural memory. The myth of Osiris and Set would have been as familiar to ancient Near Eastern peoples as modern superhero stories are to us today. It was not merely a religious tale, but a foundational cultural narrative performed in temples throughout Egypt for thousands of years before Genesis was even written. Is it mere coincidence that both Egyptian and Hebrew traditions tell stories of brotherly murder motivated by jealousy? Or did the biblical authors consciously reshape this well-known Egyptian template to express their own theological vision of humanity's first murder? The parallels to the Cain and Abel narrative extend beyond the ancient Near East into the classical world. While Greek mythology teems with tales of sibling conflict, from Zeus overthrowing his father Kronos to the mutual slaughter of Eteocles and Polynices, it's in Rome's founding myth that we find the most striking classical echo of biblical fratricide. The story begins with divine intervention and miraculous survival. Twin brothers Romulus and Remus, born of a mortal woman and the war god Mars, are abandoned at birth and cast into the Tiber River, rescued and suckled by a she-wolf, then raised by a shepherd. Twins grow to manhood unaware of their royal lineage. When they eventually overthrow the usurper king who had threatened their lives, they decide to found a new city at the site of their miraculous rescue. But here the brotherhood fractures, and the myth splinters into multiple versions, each offering different motivations for what happens next. In all versions, however, the outcome is the same. One brother kills the other, marking the foundation of Rome with an act of fratricide. According to the Roman historian Livy, the conflict centered on location. Romulus favored the Palatine Hill, while Remus preferred the Aventine. Unable to resolve their dispute through discussion, turned to augury, seeking divine signs through the observation of birds. Romulus claimed to have seen 12 auspicious vultures, while Remus saw only 6, leading Romulus to claim divine favor. In the account of Dionysius of Halicarnassus, Remus mockingly leapt over the low wall Romulus had begun to build around his chosen site. This symbolic transgression of boundaries, perhaps the most famous version of the story, provoked Romulus to fatal violence. Remus's leap and subsequent murder represented both a violation of sacred boundaries and an act of disrespect that could not be tolerated in the founding moment of a new society. The Roman poet Ennius offers yet another version, suggesting that Romulus killed Remus in a fit of anger after Remus criticized the height of the new city's walls. All these variations, the essential elements remain constant: brotherly conflict, a dispute over the founding of civilization, and resolution through violence. The parallels and contrast with Cain and Abel's narrative are revealing. Both tales feature brothers in conflict, both culminate in one brother killing the other, both murders occur at pivotal moments in human development. In Genesis, after humanity's expulsion from Eden. In Roman myth, during the founding of civilization's greatest empire. Yet the differences are equally striking. In Genesis, God clearly favors Abel, while in Roman myth, divine preference is ambiguous or contested. Cain's motivation is explicitly jealousy and rage over divine rejection, while Romulus acts to establish authority or defend the sanctity of his new foundation. Most significantly, the consequences diverge dramatically. Cain is cursed, marked, and exiled, becoming a wanderer removed from society. Romulus, by contrast, goes on to become the celebrated founder and first king of Rome, his fratricide seemingly justified by the glorious civilization that follows. This stark difference reveals contrasting cultural attitudes toward founding violence. In the Hebrew tradition, the first murder represents a horrific fall, the introduction of bloodshed into a world already comprised. This stark difference reveals contrasting cultural attitudes toward founding violence. In the Hebrew tradition, the first murder represents a horrific fall, the introduction of bloodshed into a world already compromised by sin. In Roman tradition, the fratricide, while tragic, becomes almost necessary, a violent foundation for a civilization defined by conquest and power. The Romans didn't hide their violent origin story, they celebrated it. Coins, sculptures, and public monuments throughout the empire depicted the twins and their story. Yet this embrace of founding violence stands in sharp contrast to the Hebrew condemnation of Cain's acts as the first and most terrible human crime. Interestingly, both narratives share a curious narrative silence. Genesis never explicitly explains why God rejected Cain's offering, while Roman authors offer multiple, sometimes contradictory explanations for Romulus's deadly rage. This ambiguity in both traditions shifts focus to the act itself and its consequences rather than its precise motivation. While the Roman myth was codified centuries after the Hebrew Bible took shape, it draws on much older Indo-European traditions of divine twins and founding heroes. Both narratives likely developed independently, yet reflect universal human concerns about the relationship between violence and civilization, the complex bonds between brothers, and the often bloody foundations of human society. The evidence is overwhelming. The biblical Cain and Abel narrative shares fundamental elements with multiple ancient myths. Brother versus brother conflict, different lifestyles or professions, often farmer versus shepherd, divine favor causing jealousy, murder as the resolution to the conflict, punishment and exile for the killer, continuation of the murder's line despite the crime. What are we to make of all of these astonishing parallels? Did the Hebrew scribes simply copy from their neighbors, or is something more profound happening? The most likely explanation combines cultural exchange with the power of universal archetypes. The biblical authors living at the crossroads of ancient civilizations absorbed narrative patterns from Mesopotamia, Egypt, and other mythological traditions, but they transformed these patterns to express their own unique theological vision. The rivalry between settled farmers and nomadic shepherds was a real social tension throughout the ancient Near East. The devastating potential of jealousy and the taboo against killing one's own blood were universal human concerns. These themes resonated across cultures because they spoke to fundamental aspects of the human experience. But the specific form the Cain and Abel story takes, with its portrayal of the first murder as a violation against God, its emphasis on moral responsibility, and its complex mix of punishment and protection for Cain, bears the distinctive stamp of Hebrew theological concerns. Borrowed template becomes the vehicle for a new religious message. The evidence we've examined forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. What millions consider unique divine revelation in Genesis bears the unmistakable fingerprints of much older mythological traditions. The first murder in the Bible appears to be a creative adaptation of ancient Near Eastern myths about sibling rivalry, divine preference, and the tension between different ways of life. Does this realization diminish the story's power? Or does it deepen our appreciation for how human cultures have wrestled with the same fundamental questions across millennia? When we recognize the Cain and Abel narratives as part of a vast picture of ancient myth-making, we see not just cultural borrowing, but a profound conversation spanning centuries and civilizations. The biblical authors weren't simply just copying, plagiarizing, they were participating in humanity's oldest continuous discourse about violence, jealousy, divine justice, and the complex bonds of family. The question isn't whether Genesis borrowed from older myths. The evidence makes that undeniable. The question is what this revelation means for how we understand the nature of sacred texts themselves. Are our founding stories divine dictation, untouched by human hands? Or are they the product of brilliant religious thinkers engaged with the cultural materials of their time, transforming ancient archetypes to express new theological insights? Perhaps the most profound legacy of Cain and Abel isn't the story itself, but what it reveals about the evolutionary nature of our most sacred narratives, forged not in isolation, but in the crucible of cultural exchange that has always defined the human experience. In the beginning was not the word, but the stories we've always told to make sense of our world. Thank you for watching. I hope you liked. Hit the like button, drop a comment, your favorite part from this video. Consider joining our Patreon or YouTube membership, and you could sign up for our academic courses in the description at mvp-courses.com. We could definitely use your support. We thank you.